The manga opens up with a boy seated right by the school window. He states that he likes that seat because he can quietly read light novels alone, with no one there to disturb him. He explains that extroverts are as loud as ever, hanging out again in class today, while he casually sits there reading some erotic book. He expresses his contentment, stating that if he had to hang out with people like that, he'd much rather remain a loner introvert. It's then that we learn this boy's name, Ryota Izumiya. As Ryota continues fantasizing about his seat, he goes on about how it's surrounded by 2, maybe even 3 layers of the rest of the class, making this corner spot what he considers a truly god-tier seat for someone like him. But just as he's enjoying the thought, he's suddenly interrupted by a girl calling for everyone's attention, announcing that they'd be doing seat changes today. This completely shocks Ryota, and we soon learn that this is actually the first time all year that they've done a seat change. As everyone reacts, Ryota overhears a girl mentioning that it was the class representative, Kuroki, who asked the teacher to make it happen. Hearing this, Ryota is instantly annoyed and caught off guard, internally cursing at Kuroki and questioning why she had to mess everything up, because, for a loner like him, seat changes are nothing but high risk with absolutely no reward. Moments later, the girl finally posts the seating chart on the board and tells everyone to come take a look. While some of the other students are excited about ending up right next to their friends, Ryota makes his way toward the board, trying to see where his seat has been reassigned to. But the moment he spots his new seat, he's completely shocked after realizing he's been placed right in the center of the classroom. Seeing this, Ryota completely breaks down, yelling that it's completely over for him. But after panicking for a moment, he tries to make the best of the situation, convincing himself that maybe, just maybe, he might end up being surrounded by fellow introverts too. However, as he glances back over at the seat change chart, reality quickly starts to set in. Ryota looks over and realizes that he's been placed right between Miyama, Ichinos, and Kuroki. The moment he sees this, he's completely stunned, unable to process just how unbelievably bad this situation has suddenly become for him. While all the other students were happily enjoying their new seat assignments, Ryota is left completely troubled, because as an introvert, out of everyone in the class, he somehow ended up being assigned what could only be described as the absolute god-tier seat, the one position he never wanted to have. Ryota then glances over at the seat he's been assigned to, and the moment he does, he notices that there are 3 girls sitting dangerously close to where he'll now be placed. Seeing this, Ryota is left with complete terror written all over his face, because he quickly realizes that he's about to be surrounded by 3 absolute S-tier beautiful girls. No matter how he tries to look at it, this is quite literally the worst possible scenario for someone like him. As he stands there in disbelief, Ryota overhears some of the other boys expressing their jealousy, wishing they were the ones lucky enough to sit so close to the 3 beauties in class. After all, the 3 of them were not only considered the center of the class, but were also among the top students as well. Hearing all of this only adds to Ryota's frustration, as he internally complains that all he ever wanted was to quietly sit in a corner and enjoy reading his light novels. But, instead, he's been thrown straight into what feels like pure hell. It's then that Ryota suddenly notices something strange. The girl sitting right next to him is someone he's never seen before. He then stares over at the girl, and it's here that we learn her name is Airi Miyama. Ryota immediately starts questioning why someone like her, of all people, had to end up sitting right in front of him, making this already unbearable situation feel even worse. Meanwhile, Miyama casually compliments one of her friend's nails, saying they look really pretty, before asking if she did them herself, because in her eyes, they looked absolutely amazing. We then get a look at the girl Miyama was talking to, and it's here that we learn her name is Yuria Ichinos. Ryota immediately classifies her as the downer-type Gyaru. He admits that while he definitely has a thing for big boobs and curvy bodies, Gyarus in real life are honestly pretty intimidating to him, mainly because Ryota believes they tend to get the wrong idea about situations way too easily. Miyama and Ichinos both mention how their seats ended up being pretty close to each other, which immediately makes Ryota start wondering if Rui intentionally arranged things so they could sit nearby. But the moment Miyama calls out for Rui, Ryota's face is instantly filled with shock and pure dread, as he suddenly realizes that it may have been Rui Kuroki all along, the true mastermind behind this entire seat change. Rui then glances over at Ryota with a smile on her face and casually greets him, saying that it looks like they'll be seat neighbors starting today. Realizing exactly what she's done, Ryota does his best to keep his composure and awkwardly greets her back, though his response comes off completely unconvincing. This leaves Eri Miyama staring at the two of them with a confused expression, while Yuria casually lets everyone know that the teacher is about to arrive. The teacher walks in, confirming that the seat changes have finally been completed, but then quickly tells everyone not to get too excited. He explains that the only reason they even had a seat change in the first place was because the class representative, Kuroki, strongly insisted that he allow it. The teacher makes it clear that, in his opinion, seat changes are completely pointless, and he has no intention of approving another one anytime soon. And hearing this suddenly makes Ryota realize something. After all the students finally settle into their new seats, Ryota is clearly uncomfortable. He internally panics, realizing there's no way he's seriously stuck in this seat all the way until the end of their second year. Meanwhile, Miyama quietly leans over and asks Rui if she knows who Ryota is, trying to whisper so he doesn't hear. Rui casually responds that she does, explaining that the two of them were actually in the same class back in middle school. Hearing this, Ryota, while pretending to focus on reading his book, starts questioning whether Rui Kuroki even remembers who he is at all. The thought immediately makes him even more curious, but he quickly reminds himself that he needs to calm down and just focus on reading his light novel. Ichinose then tells Rui and Miyama that she's planning to go out and buy some sushi, asking the two of them what they wanted to do as well. Hearing this, Ryota immediately realizes that the conversation has shifted into full-on girl talk. For the first time in a while, he finally feels relieved, thinking the situation is over, and internally, thanks Ichinose for saving him from the tension. Rui casually responds that she's free since track and field has the day off, before turning toward Eri and asking what she plans on doing. Caught completely off guard by the sudden question, Eri freezes for a moment before nervously beginning to answer. With a smile on her face, Eri tells the two of them that she's going to pass for today, explaining that her boyfriend said he wants to go to Starbucks with her after school. Hearing that, Ichinose casually responds that if that's the case, then it can't be helped, which prompts Eri to apologize for turning them down. Meanwhile, Ryota, after overhearing the conversation, quietly thinks to himself that the whole Starbucks with her boyfriend story sounds a little unconvincing to him. Even so, he can't help but feel a bit envious of her situation, but at the same time, he reminds himself that being someone at the very bottom of the social ladder has absolutely nothing to do with relationships anyway. Finally done with school for the day, Ryota begins walking back home completely exhausted. He reflects on how painfully unbearable all the jealous stares from the other guys had been throughout the day. As he continues walking, he notices a couple openly showing affection toward each other, which immediately irritates him, causing him to internally label them as nothing more than normies. Even so, his mood quickly starts to improve, because he reminds himself that he still has his beloved world of manga and light novels. And on top of that, today just so happens to be the release day of a novel he's been looking forward to. As Ryota finally arrives at the novel store, he quickly realizes that the novel he came to buy is completely sold out. The clerk apologizes and informs him that they're already out of stock, and hearing those words instantly crushes him. Since the novel had been a massive bestseller, deep down he knew it was only natural that it would sell out this quickly. But that realization doesn't make the disappointment hurt any less. Not wanting to give up just yet, Ryota decides that he should try checking a nearby bookstore instead. He quickly makes a call and asks the employee on the other end if they still happen to have the novel in stock. As he says the full name of the book out loud, he immediately realizes just how embarrassingly awkward it feels having to say a title like that over the phone. A moment later, the clerk responds and lets Ryota know that they do, in fact, still have a copy available in store. But for some reason, Ryota can't shake the strange feeling that something is off. The clerk sounds unusually cheerful, and on top of that, her voice feels oddly familiar, almost strangely high quality, making him wonder if he's just imagining things. The clerk informs Ryota that the book is indeed still in stock, and that there are only 4 copies left. Hearing that, Ryota immediately responds with excitement, happily telling her that he's heading there right away, while thanking her for taking the time to check for the book on his behalf. But strangely enough, even after the conversation should have ended, the clerk doesn't hang up the phone, which leaves Ryota confused, wondering, shouldn't the employee be the one to hang up after the customer? Not thinking too much of it, Ryota eventually arrives at the store. Remembering how young the clerk sounded over the phone, he figures it might have just been some new part-timer working there. Walking inside, he approaches the front and lets the clerk know that he was the one who called earlier asking about the book. The girl then turns around, and to Ryota's complete surprise, we see that the clerk is none other than Eri. Looking at him with a calm expression, she casually confirms that, yes, they do indeed have the book he was asking about. The moment both Eri and Ryota lay eyes on each other, the two of them are instantly frozen in complete shock. Ryota can barely process what he's seeing, as he suddenly realizes that Eri, of all people, has actually been working here part-time this entire time. Eri immediately looks embarrassed, and Ryota quickly notices the awkward expression written across her face. Seeing this, he instinctively looks away, trying to pretend like he didn't see anything at all, and acting as if none of this ever happened. But just as he attempts to avoid the situation, Eri suddenly reaches out and taps him on the shoulder, quietly calling out to him. She then asks Ryota if he plans on telling everyone at school that she has a part-time job, and hearing that immediately catches him completely off guard. Eri quickly presses further, nervously explaining that, just so he knows, she did receive permission from the school, and that this job falls completely within the working hours allowed under school. As she says this, she starts tearing up, desperately trying to convince him of her innocence while slowly leaning in closer toward him.
The two are suddenly interrupted by the manager, who quickly steps in and tells Eri and Ryota that enough is enough, saying that lovers' quarrels during work hours are absolutely not allowed because it goes against store policy. Hearing this instantly makes Eri blush deeply, while at the same time looking completely shocked by the misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Ryota can only stand there thinking that, at the very least, she should probably correct the manager and make it clear that he is definitely not her boyfriend. The manager then tells Eri to go take a short break in the break room for now. Still flustered and wiping the tears from her face, Eri begins walking off, while the manager, still convinced Ryota is her boyfriend, casually tells him that he can go with her too. Ryota and Eri eventually sit down together in the staff room, where an awkward silence fills the air as Eri quietly sits beside him, still softly sobbing. After a moment, Eri apologizes to Ryota, telling him that everything that happened was entirely her fault. But Ryota quickly reassures her that none of this was actually her fault at all, and instead, he ends up apologizing to her as well. Eri then looks up at Ryota with tears still welling in her eyes, and the moment he notices her expression, he can't help but realize just how unbelievably close she's sitting next to him. The sudden closeness completely catches him off guard, making him panic internally, as he realizes that, as a loner, he has absolutely no idea how to handle being alone in a room with a girl sitting this close to him. After a brief silence, Eri finally begins explaining to Ryota that, in that moment, she suddenly got scared. Eri then explains that, in that moment, she became terrified of being called poor again, just like what happened back then, which immediately leaves Ryota confused, making him question what exactly she means by it. Taking a deep breath, Eri begins opening up to him, revealing that the truth about her is that her family is actually very poor. She explains that her father passed away when she was still very young, leaving her mother to raise her all by herself ever since. Eri goes on to explain that she never really received any allowance, and that there were many times growing up where things were genuinely difficult for her. Even as she says all of this, she still tries her best to keep a smile on her face, which makes Ryota quietly realize just how rough her life has actually been. Something he never expected. Eri then continues, explaining that back in middle school, when she started seeing all of her friends wearing makeup and keeping up with the latest trends, she was the only one who simply couldn't afford to do the same. Because of that, she often felt completely left out, and honestly, miserable because of it. Yeah, I can understand that feeling. So, because of that, Eri decided that she was going to work hard and start saving up money for herself. She dedicated herself to studying fashion and learning everything she could about makeup, putting in an insane amount of effort to change the things she once felt insecure about. And after all of that hard work, Eri was finally able to become the cute version of herself that she had always wanted to be. Eri then goes on to explain to Ryota that in order to maintain that cute version of herself, she eventually had to face the reality that looking that way actually costs money, which immediately makes Ryota realize that's the reason she decided to get a job. She then confirms his thoughts, telling him that yes, that was exactly why she started working in the first place. Hearing all of this, Ryota begins thinking to himself that simply getting a part-time job doesn't automatically mean someone is poor. But Eri then quietly tells him that, honestly, being called poor doesn't really bother her anymore, because over time, She's already grown used to hearing so many people call her that. But even so, there's one thing Eri absolutely can't allow to happen. She explains that she doesn't want Yuria or Rui, the friends she's been close with ever since their first year, finding out that she's working a part-time job, and no matter what happens, she desperately wants to keep that hidden from them. As she says this, she slowly leans in even closer toward Ryota, trying to further explain just how serious this situation really is for her. But before Eri can finish what she was trying to say, Ryota suddenly interrupts her, telling her that, honestly, he genuinely respects her, which immediately catches Eri completely off guard, leaving her both shocked and confused. Ryota then explains that unlike her, he's never actually bought anything using money that he earned with his own hard work. And when he compares himself to her, he can't help but admit that she's far more mature than. Ryota then concludes that because of that, there's no way he could ever look down on someone like her, and honestly, he never would in the first place. But almost immediately after saying all of that, Ryota suddenly snaps back to reality and starts questioning what the heck he's even rambling about. Feeling awkward, he quickly glances over at Eri, trying to figure out if anything he just said might have accidentally come across as offensive to her. But, to his surprise, Eri actually seems to genuinely appreciate everything he just said, and, with a warm smile spreading across her face, she looks at Ryota and tells him that he's actually pretty sweet. After hearing everything Ryota had to say, Eri lets out a relieved smile, which immediately leaves Ryota feeling a little confused. A moment later, she stands back up and tells him that she should probably get back to work now, before reminding him about the book he originally came there to buy. Then, with a playful tone, she casually repeats the rather questionable title of the book out loud, catching Ryota off guard all over again. Ryota then makes his way over to the section where the books he came for were supposed to be, but unfortunately, by the time he gets there, every last copy has already been sold out, leaving him completely devastated all over again. But just as he's standing there in disappointment, Eri suddenly leans in close and whispers right near, asking if he managed to find the book he was looking for, which instantly jolts Ryota in surprise. Still caught off guard, he quickly tells her that no, the book had already sold out, and hearing that only makes Eri let out a small, amused giggle. Seeing Ryota's reaction, Eri starts laughing even harder, while Ryota can only sit there with a small, helpless smile on his face, once again reminding himself that this is exactly why he struggles dealing with extrovert. A moment later, Eri suddenly slides the book he had been desperately looking for right over to him, casually asking if this was the one he wanted. She then reveals to Ryota that when he first called earlier, she had actually set aside a copy for him before anyone else could buy it. The moment Ryota sees this, he practically starts viewing Eri as nothing less than an angel sent from above, as tears of pure joy begin welling up in his eyes, while he stares at her in complete gratitude. But just as he's about to reach out and grab the book, Eri suddenly stops him and teasingly asks, "So, what exactly is my thank you for reserving it for?" Without hesitation, Ryota immediately bows his head repeatedly, thanking her over and over again for going out of her way to save him a copy. However, Eri quickly stops him, telling him that that's not exactly the kind of thank you she had in mind, which instantly leaves Ryota completely confused. Eri then tells Ryota that the only reason she set the book aside for him was simply out of pure customer service, but in return, she shyly asks if he could treat her to something, saying that would make them even. Hearing this, Ryota is clearly unconvinced, but Eri quickly follows up by saying that now that he's already seen her true side, she might as well be honest about what she wants. She slowly leans in even closer toward him and casually tells him that she's actually a pretty straightforward kind of girl. So tomorrow at school, he should treat her to something at the cafeteria. Hearing all of this, Ryota is left completely devastated, and in that very moment, he instantly corrects his earlier thoughts about Eri. In his mind, she's no longer an angel. No, she's definitely way more of a devil. Eri then suddenly asks Ryota what his name was, and after being caught off guard for a moment, Ryota quietly introduces himself to her. Hearing his answer, Eri responds with a playful, almost secretive gesture, before telling him that she'll be looking forward to lunch break tomorrow. Hearing this leaves Ryota completely shocked, while Eri, on the other hand, seems energized and surprisingly happy. But before the two can continue talking any further, their conversation is suddenly interrupted when Eri's manager calls out for her, telling her to return back to the register. As she begins walking away, Eri turns back and says her goodbye to Ryota, leaving him standing there completely dumbfounded, still trying to process everything that just happened. It finally begins to sink in for Ryota. and the sudden realization that he's actually going to be having lunch with Eri hits him all at once, leaving him completely stunned. Because no matter how many times he tries to think about it, the reality remains the same. He's somehow ended up having lunch with one of the absolute queens, sitting at the very top of the school's social hierarchy. And to someone like Ryota, no matter how he looks at it, the entire situation feels completely insane. The very next day at school, Ryota finds himself once again sitting in his newly assigned seat, still surrounded by the endless jealous thoughts and bitter stares coming from the boys around him. But completely ignoring all of their resentment, Ryota does his best to focus on the novel he managed to get yesterday, thanks to Eri. And just as he's finally about to dive into reading it, he's suddenly interrupted by none other than Yuria Ichi. Yuria then stares directly at the book Ryota is holding before suddenly giving him a sharp, almost judgmental look, casually saying that she remembers it. Hearing that instantly leaves Ryota confused and incredibly nervous, as he starts panicking internally, desperately trying to figure out what exactly she meant by saying she remembered it. A moment later, Eri finally arrives at the classroom and is immediately greeted by Yuria. As she settles in, she casually glances over at Ryota and suddenly gives him a playful wink, instantly sending Ryota into full panic mode as he starts blushing uncontrollably. In his mind, something like that makes it look way too much like the two of them are secretly dating, which only makes him spiral even harder. Yuria quickly notices Eri winking at Ryota and immediately questions her about why she did it, but with no real explanation prepared. Eri simply brushes it off and tells her it was nothing. Later on, during lunch break in the cafeteria, Eri finally gets treated by Ryota, with him remembering the deal the two of them made yesterday, after Eri went out of her way to save a copy of the book he had been desperately looking for. Eri thanks Ryota for treating her, and apologizes for choosing something a little expensive, but Ryota doesn't seem to mind at all, and simply tells her to think of it as his way of saying thanks for yesterday. A moment later, Eri starts noticing that people around them have begun staring in their direction, and Ryota quickly notices it too. But honestly, he realizes he can't really blame them, considering the fact that he's casually sitting there eating lunch with one of the most beautiful girls in the entire school. Eri then softly calls out to Ryota and asks if he had been talking with Yuria earlier that morning, mentioning how it's actually pretty rare for Yuria to go out of her way to talk to guys. Hearing that, Ryota suddenly remembers what happened earlier when he was reading his book, and how Yuria randomly said that she remembered something before walking off. He then explains the entire situation to Eri, which leaves her equally confused, as she starts wondering what exactly Yuria meant by saying she remembered it. Ryota then tells her that figuring that out is exactly what he wants to know too, but for someone like him, trying to ask Yuria directly feels like setting the bar way too high. Hearing this, Eri casually suggests that she could simply ask Yuria on his behalf, but Ryota quickly shuts the idea down, saying that it honestly wouldn't feel right or be any fun if she ended up doing it for him instead. Eri then suddenly offers to tell Ryota about Yuria's secret hangout spot, suggesting that he could go there himself and ask Yuria directly. She even gives the whole idea a name, calling it Operation Get Close to Yuria, which immediately catches Ryota completely off guard. Eri then goes on to explain her reason, saying that if he really wants to know what Yuria meant earlier when she said, "I remembered it," then maybe there's a chance that after talking with him yesterday, Yuria might actually be interested in becoming friends with him. And considering the fact that their seats are now so close to each other, Eri believes the two of them should at least make an effort to get along. Hearing her explanation, Ryota starts warming up to the idea and eventually agrees to go along with the plan Eri came up with, though he quickly adds that it would probably be way easier if Eri acted as the mediator between them. But Eri immediately shakes her head and turns the idea down, saying that doing it that way would be way too boring. Ryota eventually arrives at the photo booth area. The place Eri had told him was supposedly Yuria's secret hangout spot. He begins looking around, scanning the area carefully, but no matter where he looks, he can't seem to find her anywhere. Just as he starts wondering if he came to the wrong place, he suddenly hears the sound of something clanking nearby, causing him to immediately turn toward the noise. As he turns toward the noise, Ryota finally spots Yuria messing around with one. The first thing he notices is the light tan lines visible around her chest and thighs, and the unexpected sight instantly catches his attention, leaving him momentarily frozen as he takes in what he... And after noticing all of those distinct traits, Ryota quickly concludes that the person standing there could only be Yuria. As he focuses in a little more, he then notices that she seems to be struggling with one of the machines, apparently having trouble getting it to work. And on top of noticing her struggling with the machine, Ryota quickly realizes that Yuria is actually trying to win an erotic bishoujo anime figure. What catches his attention even more is the fact that the figure is being sold at retail price, rather than some overpriced resale value, making him instantly understand why she'd be so determined to get it. Just then, Yuria suddenly turns around, seemingly trying to adjust something on the machine. But the moment she does, she spots Ryota standing there watching, which immediately leaves her completely shocked. In a surprisingly vulnerable tone, Yuria suddenly questions Ryota, asking if he came here because he was trying to dig up dirt on her, which instantly gives Ryota a strange sense of déjà vu. Before he can even properly respond, Yuria starts firing question after question, asking if he planned on exposing her for going after an erotic figure and using that to ruin her reputation. Quickly realizing the misunderstanding, Ryota immediately explains that none of that was why he came. Instead, he tells her that the real reason he came was because he actually wanted to help win the figure for her. And hearing that instantly causes Yuria to let her guard down. Hearing that, Yuria suddenly lights up with a happy expression on her face and immediately looks at Ryota, asking him, "You too?" Curious, Ryota then questions Yuria about why she was trying so hard to win the figure in the first place. He wonders if maybe she planned on giving it to someone, or perhaps her goal was to win it just so she could resell it later for profit or something. But the moment the word resell leaves his mouth, Yuria's expression instantly changes, and it becomes painfully obvious that the suggestion completely ticks her off. Yuria suddenly grabs Ryota by the front of his shirt and, clearly irritated, angrily tells him not to go lumping her together with those sleazebags. She immediately makes it clear that the only reason she was trying so hard to win the figure was because she genuinely wanted it for herself, and she refused to give in to those disgusting resellers, charging ridiculous prices. Looking him dead in the eyes, she snaps at him again, telling him he better not ever compare her to scummy resellers like them. Realizing he had clearly pissed her off, Ryota starts wondering if mentioning resellers was some kind of trigger word for Yuria. Meanwhile, with Yuria still gripping tightly onto his shirt, Ryota just stands there for a moment, trying to figure out exactly what he should do next, which only makes Yuria snap at him again, questioning whether he's even listening to what she's saying. But instead of responding, Ryota suddenly steps closer to the machine and firmly places his hand on the joystick. Without even looking back, he calmly tells Yuria that she should probably let go of him for a second, because he needs to focus. Hearing that instantly leaves Yuria completely dumbfounded. Ryota then steadies himself, his expression turning serious as he declares that he has dedicated himself solely to winning bishoujo figures, and because of that, he knows better than anyone that claw machines aren't nearly as simple as winning everything in just one shot. Ryota steadies himself and recalls one important rule he's learned over time. Claw machines are never won through brute force, but through patience and a careful, gentle touch. With that in mind, he firmly places his hand on the joystick and carefully prepares himself for the attempt to grab the figure. Meanwhile, Yuria quietly stands right behind him, watching closely as he gets ready to make his move. After carefully focusing on the machine, Ryota finally manages to win the figurine, instantly causing Yuria to stare at him in complete admiration as she excitedly compliments him, saying just how amazing he really is. Without making a big deal out of it, Ryota simply hands the figurine over to Yuria, and in that quiet moment, an unexpectedly romantic atmosphere begins to form between the two of them. Yuria is absolutely delighted to finally have the figurine in her hand, but after a moment, she looks over at Ryota and asks if he's really okay with giving it to her, especially since he was the one who actually won it. Ryota calmly reassures her that it's completely fine, explaining that the only reason he was able to win in the first place was because she had already put so much effort into working the machine beforehand, so realistically, the prize rightfully belongs to her. Hearing that sincere response immediately causes Yuria to blush. Yuria asks Ryota if he's not going to make fun of her, because no matter how much he looks at it, it's a schoolgirl who's into erotic anime. Ryota tells her that, sure, he was surprised that she liked erotic anime, especially one where breast milk shoots out, but Ryota then tells her that, honestly, he doesn't think there's anything wrong with proudly being open about the things you genuinely love. Hearing those words immediately leaves Yuria with an astonished expression on her face. Even Ryota himself begins to realize that these days, he doesn't even bother using a cover to hide his light novels, simply because he's no longer ashamed of the things he enjoys. To him, that's exactly what it truly means to be an otaku. Ryota then tells Yuria that he doesn't think there's anything wrong with wanting to keep your hobbies private, but if there's something you genuinely love, you should never be the one putting yourself down for enjoying it. Hearing that leaves Yuria staring at him with a bright expression suddenly full of admiration. But almost immediately after saying all of that, Ryota quickly snaps back to reality and starts questioning himself, wondering what the heck he was even talking about, before instantly belittling himself and reminding himself that he's basically at the very bottom of the social barrier. Trying to escape the awkwardness, Ryota hurriedly shifts the conversation and suggests that maybe the two of them should just forget everything that happened to. But to his surprise, Yuria immediately shuts that idea down, firmly telling him that no, she has no intention of doing that. She then reveals that the reason she doesn't want to forget what happened today is because she's actually an otaku too, which instantly leaves Ryota completely shocked. Caught off guard, Ryota immediately questions her, asking if that means she's basically been a closet otaku this entire time. Yuria quickly responds, telling him that it's not like she was actively trying to hide it or anything, but for her, it's just really difficult being open about those kinds of hobbies when she's around Eri and Rui. Yuria then explains to Ryota that in the past, just because she liked anime, she ended up losing people who were once close to her. And after going through that over and over again, she simply grew tired of it. That was exactly why she decided to keep that side of herself hidden from both Eri and Rui. Ryota then apologizes to Yuria, admitting that maybe he had asked something that was a little too personal, which leaves Yuria momentarily. A second later, Yuria suddenly asks him if his name was Izumiya. Ryota confirms that it is, but hearing her ask that immediately makes him wonder if she somehow didn't remember his name until now. Without warning, Yuria suddenly leans in much closer toward Ryota, and in a desperate tone, begs him not to tell anyone that she's an otaku, especially not Eri or Rui. Ryota, feeling the pressure of how intense the situation had suddenly become, quickly assures Yuria that he had no intention of telling anyone about her secret. Hearing that instantly makes Yuria let out a relieved expression, happily saying that if that's the case, then she doesn't have to keep hiding that side of herself from him. A moment later, she reaches into her bag and pulls out the exact thing she had been referring to earlier that morning, the very same novel Ryota had been reading in class. Holding it up, Yuria then reveals to him that she had actually bought a copy of that novel herself as well. It then finally dawns on Ryota that what she remembered was actually the book title. Yuri then tells Ryota that he should give her his line because she decided that he's going to be her partner for Otaku Talk, which Ryota realizes was way too sudden. Yuri then blackmails him, stating if he wouldn't go along with her, she'll tell everyone he's been eyeing her thighs lewdly, and she will expose him to everyone, which makes Ryota tremble. Yuria then slowly leans in closer toward Ryota and tells him that from now on, he'll keep her secret, while she'll make sure to keep his as well. As she says those words, she looks at him with a quiet smile spreading across her face. Yuria then leans back slightly before teasingly telling Ryota that, from now on, this is the kind of relationship the two of them are going to have. A playful smile forms across her face, making Ryota realize that things between them had just taken a very unexpected turn. A moment later, Ryota raises his phone and notices a new message from Yuria, making him suddenly realize that, somehow, this was the moment he officially became friends with her. As he stares at the message, Ryota can't help but reflect on how, without even meaning to, he ended up forming a completely different kind of relationship with Yuria compared to the one he had already built with Eri. Later that night, back at home, Ryota collapses onto his bed completely exhausted after everything that had happened throughout the day. As he stares at the ceiling, he can't help but think to himself how unbelievable it was that Yuria, of all people, turned out to be an otaku. Just then, his phone suddenly lets out a notification. Ryota picks it up and sees that Eri had texted him, asking if he ever ended up talking to Yuria about what happened earlier that morning. Seeing the message immediately makes Ryota start thinking about how he's supposed to protect Yuria's secret now. After hesitating for a moment, he simply replies to Eri, telling her to just forget about it, which only leaves Eri immediately trying to press him for more information. A moment later, Eri sends Ryota another message, telling him that since she was the one who helped him get closer to Yuria, she now kind of wants him to treat her to the new Frappuccino from Staba as a little Thank you. Reading that immediately makes Ryota realize that after treating her to the katsukuri earlier, she'd clearly gotten a taste for making these kinds of requests. After thinking about it for a moment, he reluctantly decides that if it's not until next week, then maybe he can manage somehow. But before he can think any further, another notification suddenly pops up on his phone, and this time, it's from Yuria. In her message, Yuria thanks him for everything that happened earlier. Then, as a way of returning the favor for helping her win the figure, she suggests that the two of them should go watch a movie together sometime, adding that this time it would be completely on her. She quickly follows it up by saying that if he doesn't feel like going to a movie, then they could always do something else instead. The moment Ryota finishes reading the message, he's left completely stunned, because in his mind, there is absolutely no way he ever imagined himself going out to watch a movie. Ryota suddenly realizes that he's somehow been left with two completely unbelievable options in front of him. First, going out to get the new Frappuccino at Staba with Irie, and second, going to watch a movie alone with Yuria, just the two of them. The sheer reality of both choices immediately causes Ryota to mentally break down, as he struggles to process how situations like this could possibly be happening in the life of a forever gloomy loner like himself. To him, something like this should have been completely impossible. It's in that moment that Ryota comes to a sudden realization. This must be what people call being a Ryu, someone who's actually thriving. And completely overwhelmed by everything that's happened, Ryota collapses back onto his bed in pure exhaustion, quietly thinking to himself that all of this, every single bit of it, started because of that one simple seat change. Ryota then begins reflecting on the seat change that Rui arranged, quietly wondering to himself whether everything that happened was actually deliberate, or if it was all just one massive coincidence. He starts questioning that if it really had been intentional, then why would someone like him, a gloomy loner who barely stands out, be placed in what was basically the prime seat in the entire classroom? The thought then leads him to wonder if maybe Rui had some kind of grudge against him, especially considering the fact that the two of them went to the same middle school, even though they had never actually spoken to each other. But almost immediately, Ryota shuts down that idea himself, belittling the very thought and reminding himself that there was no way someone like Rui would ever notice someone as insignificant as him. In the end, he convinces himself that everything that happened had to be nothing more than pure coincidence. But what Ryota doesn't realize is that this entire time, Rui has actually had her eyes fixed on him all along.